service games need SBMM. Both are needed to ensure long-term sustainability and player engagement, which are both crucial components in ensuring a successful live service game. Then what is this? We have lost 80% of the player base because of the matchmaking. All right, here we go. The developer who wrote the code for Call of Duty's matchmaking algorithm just sat down for an interview this week. There are some things being said that are actually pretty relatable and good to hear. And then there are some things that just don't make any sense. The extensive amount of research and obsession I've put into figuring out COD's matchmaking completely contradicts. This developer, whose name is Charlie Olson, is no longer working on Call of Duty and rather co-founded a studio called Invocation Games, which develops custom SBMM algorithms for multiplayer video games. This guy has plenty of experience working with and creating matchmaking algorithms, and he offers some insight and feedback about Call of Duty's matchmaking. Let's keep in mind that, as a side note, Activision has since developed this algorithm to be much more sophisticated than just skill-based matchmaking, but that is addressed in the article. That being said, let's dive into the most important moments from the interview. Olson initially wrote the MMR algorithm for China's Call of Duty Online in 2015, with the algorithm making its way into the first mainline entry with 2016's Infinite Warfare. It's a system that's been there ever since, with the matchmaker itself becoming more sophisticated over the years, but Olson's rating algorithm remained essentially unchanged. Olson would move on from Raven Software in 2020, going on to co-found Invocation Games in 2022, a development studio that provides custom skill rating and ranking systems to games. So, Call of Duty Online was a game that came out exclusively in China in 2015. However, this algorithm was also applied to Infinite Warfare, clearly because whatever it did, it worked. It is described as an MMR algorithm, which obviously means that its matchmaking is based on a player's hidden MMR, or matchmaking rank, which is just their skill level quantified in a numerical value. Notice here it says the matchmaker itself became more sophisticated, but the MMR algorithm remained the same. Now, I wouldn't point fingers and say that Tom Henderson didn't press far enough, but the fact the article literally says the matchmaker is more complex, but the rating system is the same, goes to show that it has evolved past the point of simply matching only based on skill rating, despite that skill measurement being evaluated in basically the same way. I'm sure Charlie Olson's original algorithm wasn't meant to be manipulative, but obviously as we have experienced the game from 2019 onwards, something has definitely changed, not the least of which is the inclusion of disbanding lobbies, which automatically suggests that there is something way beyond skill measurement taking place, but we'll talk about that later. On stats, Olson explained that around half of the players would be driven to stop playing without SBMM, because the sometimes you stomp, sometimes you get stomped narrative only applies to around 40% of players by skill, with 10% of the very top players doing 90% of the pub stomping. Olson used XDefiant as an example of churn-based matchmaking and explained that although XDefiant had team balancing, people don't like being the weak link repeatedly, and high-skill players don't like carrying a team of potatoes all the time. Now, I can see where he's coming from here, but the fact that he claims good players don't like carrying potatoes all the time is a bit of an assumption, I would say. Sure, everyone hates losing, but if you have all potatoes on your team in a game with team balancing, then certainly the opposing team also has their fair share of potatoes. Otherwise, it would be completely unfair. As long as I'm playing a fun match that isn't rigged, even if it's competitive, I wouldn't care. But the difference between Black Ops 6 and XDefiant is night and day. XDefiant sees tons of variety, and it's extremely obvious that the matchmaking is purely based on connection. One day, I'll play competitive games, the next, I'll play mostly average players, and the following day, I'll play a mixture of both. It's a completely organic experience that keeps me coming back despite the game shutting down. I get that people don't want to be the weak link all the time, but the obvious answer to that is just play the game more and get better. I don't understand the want or need to handhold the bottom of the barrel bad players when it essentially screws over a vast majority of the player base in comparison to them. Realistically, only the bottom 30% of players get consistently stomped, and that's really generous. And the top 70% are just left playing in matches where everyone is their clone or just better than them. Barring off the bottom bracket from everyone else creates an environment where literally everyone just plays people near their exact skill level, especially considering the skill distribution for almost everything is a bell curve, meaning the vast majority of players are average, slightly below average, or slightly above average. Anyone that is absolutely insane or absolutely terrible are outliers. But protecting the worst players means that now everyone else is stuck playing their own clones, and the average players never experience playing anyone noticeably worse or better than them. And of course, the best players get scared away by the egregiously competitive environment that they're forced into. Despite XDefiant shutting down, and only the players that really love the game are still playing, the game still feels more organic than COD. You'd figure there would only be sweats, but guess what? More gamers are just playing because the game is fun. COD would have you believe that everyone that plays has no life, but that's actually only 10% of the player base. Even a game with a strikingly small player base of diehard fans like XDefiant is way less competitive than COD is by an absolute landslide. It goes to show that assuming a game is killed by too many sweats is absolute lunacy and isn't true at all. XDefiant was mishandled. The game did not fail because of the lack of skill matching. The math of the skill distribution doesn't make any sense. You'd almost never get a match that was ultra competitive, and even if there was somebody absolutely pub stomping, you wouldn't even run into that often. When asked for a solution to SBMM, Olsen believes that it is needed to ensure long-term sustainability for a live service game. However, thinks that its solution is transparency of where players rank with their skill. The massive problem with SBMM, though, is that you don't know what league you're in anymore. SBMM takes away the sense of skill and mastery. There's less skill feedback, stats don't matter as much, KD is less of a bragging right. It's a serious design problem, really. This is the thing he says that most resonates with me. Strict skill matching like that of COD creates a warped sense of skill, where good players think they're worse than they are, and bad players think they're better than they are, because there's no legitimate comparison to the other 90% of players in the player base. They're confined to an echo chamber of clones. Stats are proportional to your skill bracket, and a top 1% player can pull a 2KD, and a bottom 10% player can pull a 2KD in a match, and they're not even close to being the same caliber player. SBMM warps your perception of your own performance and skill, and believe it or not, this is actually the least of our worries with SBMM. It may mess with our perception, but how it messes with our experience is far worse. Olsen thinks one solution is to reward players with more XP for being better at the game. Casual doesn't need to be completely about skill like ranked, but you should be able to see something about the average skill of your lobby or opponents. Like maybe this match is a gold tier, so you get a 1.2 XP multiplier. You should be able to see your MMR, matchmaking rating, aka skill rating, in the combat record. You shouldn't have to file a personal data request with Activision just to get that information, and we've seen you can actually do that. But it fluctuates so much that it's impossible to know how good the game actually thinks you are, or they're just hiding it. Now, this is simply just a good idea. Still separate based on skill level if you absolutely have to, which I don't think you have to, but if you absolutely have to, reward the better players for playing in much tougher matches. This would incentivize improvement and also give better players a reason to stay for their troubles. There is no downside to this. And if bad players are like, oh, we're getting less XP, get better. Contrary to what some players believe, you really don't have to try your hardest every match. If you go off meta, your MMR will adapt after a few bad games and matches will get easier. The exception would be when you're playing low pop modes that attract high skill players, or during open betas, he said. For example, you probably shouldn't expect a game mode like Domination, a game mode that traditionally attracts higher skilled players, to get much easier. And this is my favorite part right here. Speaking of conspiracy theories, Olsen also pointed out that COD's SBMM gets mistaken for EOMM, engagement optimized matchmaking, but it's really just because the MMR is highly responsive and volatile. Alright, this is where I draw the line, because as someone who really pushed along the knowledge of EOMM along with a few other creators, I can say that this is almost a direct call out to my niche, maybe even me, or a few other creators personally. There is a whole rant I can go on here, but the fact remains that Call of Duty's matchmaking definitely measures engagement. I mean, in this video presentation alone from Activision themselves, it says that matches are simulated before they're played so that the game can measure your player engagement state to see what kind of a match is best for you. Olsen's reasoning for people quote-unquote mistaking COD's SBMM for EOMM also seems a bit unstable, because he says the MMR is just incredibly volatile. Except in an SBMM system, volatile MMR makes absolutely no sense. One loss or one bad performance shouldn't mean the algorithm sees you as a player that's 30% worse than your most recent MMR value, or the inverse. One great game doesn't mean that you're the best player to walk the earth. You don't go from a top 40% player to a top 10% player in one game, but that's exactly what it seems like COD does. It'll toss you a bone when you log on, then if you do well, congratulations, because now you're somehow playing in an esports tournament. Volatile volatile MMR ratings just make no sense. If they were to truly serve the purpose of SBMM, they would not be so volatile. They would adjust slowly and steadily, and if you're consistently performing better than the players in your skill bracket, your MMR should rise. Getting constantly jerked around by highly volatile MMR only means one thing, that the game is trying to keep you engaged. A bad loss followed by a good win to keep you playing, or a good win followed by a bad loss to keep you guessing. It's not what it seems at all. Not to mention all of the other heaps of evidence that supports the game being rigged for engagement, like dodging accusations, the patents, the white papers that explicitly detail how the matchmaking works, and just the experience of playing the game in the first place. Claiming COD's matchmaking doesn't at all measure engagement is so provably false, it's staggering. Take it from someone who is obsessed over every little piece of information in order to truly figure it out. I'm surprised he tried to debunk this rumor. If he was right, then this entire presentation, this entire white paper, and all of these patents would have all just been complete nonsense that Activision just created for no reason and never used, just for the sake of creating them. An absolutely preposterous claim. And the final segment. But first, I wanted to address the elephant in the room when it came to Call of Duty's SBMM white paper and its legitimacy, because as we all know, there's always a sense of doubt when a giant company tries to be transparent. When asked, Olsen told me that the white paper is accurate, and he can attest to it being based on his own analysis at Call of Duty and on other games. Live service games need SBMM, and SBMM needs MMR, he said. He continued to explain that both are needed to ensure long-term sustainability and player engagement, which are both crucial components in ensuring a successful live service game. But that doesn't mean everyone should just shut up and like SBMM, said Olsen. I agree with him at the end here, but I'm still so surprised that he says we shouldn't shut up and like SBMM. After defending its apparent usefulness for video games, he then claims that it's not perfect, which makes enough sense. There are ways that it can be made more fair. It's just clear that Activision refuses to acknowledge that the game is torture for anyone who is above average, and it goes to show that they only care about making the matchmaking as quality as possible for players who buy microtransactions, which is detailed in multiple sections of this patent. Him also claiming that the white papers are legit should immediately point out that he acknowledges some form of engagement measurement, and that the game is sacrificing ping for engaging matches rather than giving you the highest possible quality and connection. Check out this video here for more information about the white papers. You can't read the white papers and blog posts in full detail and not walk away realizing there is far more than just basic skill-based matchmaking with hidden MMR. Just scrutinize their claims and the Q&A, and you'll quickly realize they're running away from actually addressing any issues. They just hoped we were stupid enough to shut up and believe their half-truths. SBMM sure does need MMR, but given how volatile it is, there's no way that it's an honest form of SBMM. Your overall skill rating shouldn't change drastically based on one performance. It should ride on the averages that span across multiple performances over a certain span of time. Anything other than that is just proof that the game shifts in order to compensate for any aggravation you may be feeling, or to just make you confused as to why you were so good last game but got crushed this game. But that's all I got for now. Let me know what you think about this article. There's a lot of good things said, but most of it still doesn't hold up to scrutiny. I can tell Charlie Olsen didn't have any malice behind designing the SBMM, but Activision has